So, you probably heard the story about the China-Taliban deal, right? This idea of a resource-hungry dragon swooping in to grab all of Afghanistan's mineral wealth. But what if that whole story is just plain wrong? Today, we're going to dig into a relationship that's actually less about gold and a lot more about guards.
So let's start with this number, $1 trillion. That's the mind-boggling estimate for Afghanistan's untapped mineral resources. And yep, after the U.S. withdrawal back in 2021, pretty much everyone assumed China was about to hit the geologic jackpot.
The narrative we all heard was basically this: a new gold rush in Afghanistan. Beijing, being all pragmatic, was supposed to be the one to finally cash in where the West had failed, securing resources and expanding its massive Belt and Road Initiative.
But that's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? When you actually start digging beneath all the headlines and the fancy handshake photos, a completely different picture starts to emerge. And frankly, what we've found totally contradicts that popular story of an economic conquest.
So to figure this out, we have to look at the actual deals themselves. And when you do that, the first thing you find isn't some great success story. No. It's a story of pretty dramatic failure, a failure that really shows the deep cracks in this supposed partnership.
And this slide right here says it all. On the left, you see the big handshake that sealed a 25-year oil deal in 2023. It was hailed as this huge win. But then look at the right, the aftermath. By mid-2025, the whole thing had completely fallen apart. The Taliban suspended the contract, basically accusing the Chinese company of not holding up its end of the bargain. And listen to this. This quote from a Chinese employee who was right there in the middle of it. It's just incredible. He claims the Taliban literally took over the joint venture by force, driving the Chinese staff out at gunpoint. It just goes to show you the raw tension that's hiding behind all those diplomatic smiles.
And look, this wasn't just a one-off, a single oil deal gone bad. Not at all. We see the exact same pattern with what was supposed to be the absolute crown jewel of their partnership, the Mez-Ayanak copper deposit, which happens to be the second largest in the entire world.
This timeline just lays out decades of going absolutely nowhere. A deal was signed way back in 2008. But here we are. After 16 years, a recent groundbreaking ceremony was really just a photo op. I mean, between major security threats, arguments over the contract, and the fact they found ancient Buddhist ruins on the site, not a single piece of copper has actually been commercially extracted. The earliest anyone thinks they'll see anything is 2026. It's a zombie mine, it's alive on paper, but in reality, it's dead.
Okay, so if the multi-billion-dollar economic deals are either stalling or just collapsing, it begs a really fundamental question.
I mean, why would Beijing pour so much diplomatic energy into the Taliban if the economic payoff is basically a fantasy at this point? Well, the answer isn't buried in the ground in Afghanistan. It's right on the border.
The answer is all about security, and specifically, this group, ETM. What really keeps Beijing up at night is the fear that the instability in Afghanistan could just spill right over into its own Xinjiang region, creating a safe haven for Uyghur militants right on its doorstep.
You see, this changes the entire equation. This isn't about profit, it's about protection. China isn't really paying for copper or oil. You could almost say it's paying the Taliban for border security, like a multi-billion-dollar protection racket to keep its western flank safe.
And here's the kicker. On this security front, the Taliban is actually delivering. They've publicly sworn that no group will use Afghan soil to attack China. But more importantly, and this is confirmed by United Nations reports, they've taken real steps actually relocating Uyghur militants away from that very sensitive border area. They are holding up their end of the security bargain.
But that kind of cooperation doesn't come for free. If China isn't paying with successful economic projects, what exactly is it offering? Well, the currency is something the Taliban wants even more than cash: diplomatic legitimacy.
Think about it. Pretty much the whole world has hit the Taliban with sanctions and refuses to recognize their government. But Beijing? They've taken the complete opposite path. They've been slowly building a working relationship, giving the regime a critical lifeline on the world stage and breaking its isolation. And this didn't just happen overnight. It was a very calculated step-by-step process. First, they kept their embassy in Kabul open when almost everyone else fled. Then, they extended a prestigious invitation to join the Belt and Road Initiative. And then came the biggest step of all.
In January 2024, China's President Xi Jinping himself personally accepted the credentials of the Taliban's new ambassador. Now, while it's not a formal declaration of recognition, let's be honest, it's a massive form of de facto recognition. It gives the regime a level of legitimacy that no other major power has been willing to offer.
All right, so let's pull all of this together. If we actually score this thing like a business deal, who's winning? Well, a quick scorecard of the relationship makes the picture really, really clear.
As you can see, the dynamic is pretty straightforward. Security for China? Check. That's a success. Diplomacy for the Taliban? Absolutely, a huge success. But the economy, the part everyone focuses on, it's a categorical failure. The mineral wealth is simply not flowing.
And you know, there's a perfect metaphor that sums up this entire relationship. The Taliban has been eagerly building a road through the strategic walk-on corridor because they are desperate for an economic connection to China. But on the other side of the border, China, always cautious and obsessed with security, has kept its gate firmly locked. It's a road to nowhere, the perfect symbol for a partnership where one side wants commerce and the other wants containment.
Which leaves us with one final big question. This is a purely transactional alliance, but the motivations are completely out of balance. A deal built on such different priorities is by its very nature fragile. And you have to wonder, how long can it possibly last?